been night and day for us as far as all of the insights and data availability and reporting, and a lot of opportunity to align different teams that weren't really maybe talking with each other as much as they had been prior.
I'm a new user for the last 6 months, and I use it very quick to do a report and identify, uh, you know, bills with taxes, and we're a tax exempt organization. So up to now, we have been refunded 1.3 millions.
Now that it's in Energy Cap, we can drill down and find, like, well, what are our top variances and what was happening in those buildings, and we just could not do this until we got an Energy Cap.
There's nothing else that I'm aware of that really does everything in one place in the way that Energy Cap does.
It's been night and day for us.
Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm Tom Diliberti, and the webinar topic today is Facility Checkup, your guide to energy health, patient comfort, and budget control. Let me start today's webinar by introducing myself. So even though you might see Thomas on my screen, I go by Tom. My history is I've partnered with organizations, more than 250 organizations nationwide, just worked around the country, and the focus has always been on trying to help them optimize their energy management strategies. So I've worked across diverse industries, and the focus has always been on trying to cut consumption and reduce costs. So I've been doing this for 20 years, and like I say, I've been everywhere and been to a lot of places and talked to a lot of people. And who I work for is Energy Cap. And if you're unfamiliar with who we are a utility bill tracking company. We've been in the industry for a long time, for 45 years. And we have several parts of our software that may be helpful for saving energy. Some of those will come up in conversation today, but the focus of today is on strategies to reduce costs and keep our patients comfortable and try to help your facilities become more efficient. So the agenda, I want to start with a quick discussion or a quick overview of forecast utility rates. I want to then bounce into a conversation or a couple graphs and charts on typical hospital costs in typical areas of consumption. I want to talk about the ASHE Energy to Care dashboard and talk about an alternative that if you're looking a little bit more for information, I want to talk about some things that are out there that you can use. I want to talk about your energy health, using your utility data to take a look at your health. Talk about those strategies, which is where most of the webinar is going to live, is just talking about ways to reduce your energy profile and some key things to consider, and then finalize the presentation today by talking about cost avoidance. So what I'd like to do first is actually poll the audience and see where you're from, or at least learn about how much time you've spent working on energy management strategies. So if you could take a second, please, to respond to this question. I always like to have an understanding of the people that are on the webinar and the experience you have in working with energy management strategies. So if we could pop up the poll and give people a chance to respond. Now, I'm not seeing the poll on my end. Is the poll visible to the attendees? Oh, there it is. Yep.
Perfect.
Perfect.
And Allison, I think we're good to wrap it up.
Great. Okay, so it looks like we have a pretty even distribution of people that are just starting out and trying to learn about some energy management strategies, as well as some people that have been in the arena for quite a few years. So that's great news. Hopefully, I can help satisfy each of you as you listen to the webinar, and please ask questions. Don't hesitate to ask questions in the Q&A. I'm happy to answer any questions as we go, or if it makes sense, we can delay to the end. But one of the things that I very much enjoy doing is providing feedback and help anywhere I can. So with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about energy prices. Something that you might not be keenly aware, probably have a sense of, but energy prices are on the rise and expected to rise pretty dramatically in the years ahead. So what you see on the screen right now is a picture of the US broken out by region. And there's a lot of text on this slide, so I want to give you a chance to allow your eyes to wander over it a little bit. The theme here is that rates are on the rise all over the place. So if you jump to the south, you might notice one of the things that's driving rates is going to be population growth and climate impact. Or if you go to the northeast, it's massive demand and high baseline prices. If you jump out west again, you might see that there's climate vulnerability. Ultimately, what the message that I want you to hear is utility prices, energy prices are on the rise, and it's going to dramatically affect how we operate our facilities in the future. There's going to be a large financial impact if we don't come up with strategies and ways to offset some of these costs that are coming down the pipe. I say all that, and one of the things many times that comes through as people get to know me is I get super excited about energy management and trying to do things to cut costs. But I want to start this webinar today by really focusing on the fact that I recognize that saving energy and reducing costs is not the #1 priority for organizations. In the healthcare industry, patient care and staff safety, comfort, all those things are critical in order for our spaces to operate optimally. And so I don't want you to lose sight with the recommendations I'm going to make today that somehow that is a higher priority than what the core business is in the healthcare industry. I also recognize that organizations are experiencing increased expectations for environmental responsibility. Regulatory compliance has become a bigger and bigger deal. And there's also more and more concerns about resiliency and making sure that our facilities can operate under severe conditions. And so I recognize right off the bat, once again, that these are higher priorities, but it doesn't mean that we can't and should spend some time and energy focusing on our energy use and trying to manage our costs. So where's the energy going? This slide here, just a quick bar chart on the right-hand side, shows for a typical facility, and I recognize, typical, what does that mean? Because most facilities have some unique features of them. But a typical facility, 60% of the energy is being utilized in the form of electricity, 30% natural gas, and water and sewer costs and use amounts to about 10% of your bill. If you roll it up, typical facilities or facilities in the range or spectrum of what it might cost to operate could range anywhere between $3 to $8 per square foot. Some individual medical centers might cost $5 million to operate. So just for a single facility, it might be very significant cost. And that, as you might imagine, can be massive, and in 10 times that if you have facilities that are spread out over a campus, a huge area within a city, or spread out over a sprawling space. So those numbers are eye-popping and they're huge. You might also recognize that hospitals consume more energy than anything in commercial buildings other than food and beverage facilities. And I thought you might also benefit by knowing that the average EUI is 234 kBTU per square foot. So if you're one of those people on the webinar today that have already spent some time, you have a pretty good understanding about the energy use for your facilities, you might immediately compare with that number to see where you stand. Again, the average is 234, and the best performers around the country are using about 150 kBTU per square foot per year. Another chart here I wanted to share with you is just where's the energy going. So this pie chart shows you that 50 to 60% of the energy flowing into our healthcare facilities is used in the form of HVAC, which we recognize is critical. We have to have temperature conditions inside our spaces that are comfortable and reasonable to keep everybody healthy and productive. And as we focus on some of the solutions or some of the ways to save energy, I want to come back to this HVAC because it's the biggest piece of the pie and the biggest opportunity to save. 15 to 20% of the energy is being utilized for lighting. Medical equipment is 10 to 15. Water heating is 5 to 10. And kitchens and IT stuff is 5 to 10. So as you look at the pieces of the pie, recognize we know these spaces are typically running 24/7. And so focusing on the HVAC as an opportunity is once again a theme that you're going to hear throughout this presentation as I get to some of the recommendations later on. Guessing, because of the diverse range of people on the call today, some of you have had exposure to this tool that's provided by ASHE called the Energy to Care Dashboard. For those of you that are unfamiliar, this is a free tool that's provided by ASHE. So people that are members of ASHE can download this tool, or at least you can gain access to this tool. And what it is a utility bill tracking software program that allows you to connect your data with Energy Star. And so first and foremost, I want to make sure you know that it exists. So if you're looking for something, you don't know where to start, please make sure that you dig into this and let me know if you have any questions as we go, and I'm happy to answer them. And out of curiosity, I wanted to find out the people on the call, are you currently using this? I wanted to find out to what extent the people on today's webinar were actually using this as a resource or as a tool. So let me give you a few seconds here to respond to the poll, but if you could please give me some feedback just so we know. Okay, probably enough time to respond. Can we see the poll results? Okay, so it comes up this way. It's where 10% of the people have said that they do use it, 40% do not, and another 50% did not even realize it existed. So again, pretty diverse set of answers there. What I want to focus on for the next several slides is a tool that's similar to Energy to Care, but goes beyond Energy to Care. So it's Energy Cap's utility management tool. And as I get into this, I want to make sure that I make clear how important it is to have a tool like this, because utility data is really analogous to your facility vital signs. With us working in the healthcare industry and recognizing the first thing you do when you go into a doctor's office is you get tested, right? You get your heart rate tested, your blood pressure, your respiratory rate, your body temperature, your oxygen saturation. That is fundamental to doctors and medical professionals diagnosing if there's something wrong with an individual. And the same thing is true with your medical facilities. It's the utility data that provides that information for you to know what's going on and to take action to better manage those facilities. And so what I was saying is Energy Cap is a software program that has similarities to Energy to Care. Again, the free tool is provided by ASHE, but Energy Cap has more components, more modules to it that can help a organization dig into their data. And so it's got this part of the tool called Smart Analytics, which allows you to look at interval data. Carbon Hub, which allows you to do emissions reporting. If your organization is looking for a way to capture your bill data, that's a service that can be provided. It has accounting functionality and chargebacks, and you can do reporting. So it's a very powerful tool that would take you beyond what the Energy to Care dashboard can do. The other real benefit of having a tool that has all of this functionality is you can share that data between your teams. So your facilities team, your sustainability team, a finance team, and your IT team, if everybody can have access to the data, it's the best case scenario for coming together to better manage your facilities to improve efficiency. So having that sharing, that ability for people to see the data and to have dashboards and reports and things that can be passed from one group to the next really is critical to the overall message of efficiency. As you manage your bills, though, the number one thing you got to do is start with the basics. Sometimes people make this thing more complicated. People think that you got to do big fancy things in order to recoup money or become more efficient. And I would say all of my experience, my 20 years in the industry, suggests the opposite. Usually, if you go back to the basics, you're going to begin to reap savings and a benefit right out of the box. And in my mind, the basics is bringing all that utility data into one place. It's centralizing that data and getting yourself organized. I'll tell you here in a second of a couple huge savings opportunities that occur. But the key point is that when the data comes together, you have a chance to dig into it and figure out what's going on. As it comes into one spot, it also gives you the chance to connect the dots between what's happening in the field and what's happening on your bills. So piece of advice or suggestion is after you get your data in one spot and you're digging into your data, get out and field verify the meters. Make sure that as you pay for a bill and you know where the meter physically is in your facilities, you need to understand better what that meter serves. Because if there's a disconnect between what you think the meter serves and how you're managing a certain space, you're going to get data that just doesn't make sense in terms of the management of your facilities. So get out in your buildings, audit your buildings at different times of the day, different days of the week, in different times during the year, because buildings perform differently during heating season and cooling season, during the shoulder months. And start to look for patterns and anomalies, because typically the patterns suggest opportunities for savings as well as the anomalies. Pay closer attention to the building operations as people are using your facilities. And I'd also highlight the idea that not all buildings are the same, obviously, and they're all utilized in different ways. So as you approach a building and you try to ramp up your ability to manage things better, recognize that one building has to be seen in its own way. You can't compare that necessarily to others because some buildings might, because of their usage, they might be able to be aggressively managed. Maybe they can be turned off or set back or managed very aggressively during weekends or periods of the year, where other facilities have to run 24/7 because of how they are utilized. So recognize what's happening in the buildings and keep an open mind to solutions that apply uniquely to a building that might provide a benefit. Another part of the story that I think needs to happen early on in the process is working with your utility providers. Most utility companies are very helpful at identifying rebates and opportunities, incentives for you to recapture some money as you're doing projects or managing things more aggressively. So please consider that as you're building your programs and trying to pursue more efficiency. Connect with your utility vendors because they can be a great asset. I mentioned just a quick second ago about the things that we see in the bills and some great opportunities that most organizations have available to them. And they're highlighted here on this slide. And what it is we have 40 years of experience that tells us that you can't always count on the accuracy of your utility data. Sometimes the bill that shows up, you're not even responsible for paying it. So one of the things that we recommend that everybody do early in the process is make sure that you're responsible for paying for all the bills that you're currently paying for. So check the account ownership and verify where that meter is in the field and make sure that you are responsible for paying that bill. It seems almost too simple, but if you are an organization with multiple buildings and potentially hundreds and hundreds of meters, I can almost guarantee you're paying for some bills that you're not responsible for, and nobody may know about it. Another common mistake we find on bills is the meter multiplier. Most electrical meters will have a meter multiplier stamped on the meter, and that meter multiplier should match what's on the bill. You'd be surprised how often those things don't match. And I want to just make sure that I draw to your attention that it's an opportunity for you to find savings and at least make sure that it is correct. So don't ignore that. Dig into the bill, look at the line items, get out in the field and check those meter multipliers. Another area that we see from our clients of great opportunity is taxes and fees. Some organizations aren't responsible for paying certain taxes or fees associated with cities or locations of where a building may be. So get into those fees. Don't just receive a bill, look at the amount that's owed and assume that you're responsible for all that. Someone on your staff needs to get into the data in order to make sure that you're paying correctly for the things that you're responsible for and not being stuck with burdens that you're not responsible for. So now, taking you through this story of improvement. So now you're centralizing your data. You're bringing it all together in one spot. You're starting to check your bills. You're confirming things in the field. The next thing that I'd recommend you do is to just start to do some bill audits. And what I mean by that is someone needs to regularly check your bills to make sure that they make sense based on previous patterns. Does the current bill look similar to previous years or previous months, where you can, by looking at that, say that seems reasonable based on the previous data? Because if you just assume everything that rolls into your organization is correct, once again, there are going to be mistakes that don't get caught. So doing regular bill audits needs to be a common practice in order for you to make sure that you're paying correctly and catch mistakes, because mistakes happen with very regular, just happen very regularly. Okay, so now you got your data, you're checking it, you've built a process where you're doing some bill audits. The next step in the process now is to do more analytics with the data. You want to do some benchmarking. You want to compare buildings one to another. And I started the webinar today. One of the first couple slides was talking about the average energy use intensity for medical facilities was 234. Well, you need to calculate that. You need to take a look at your facility and understand how much energy use you have per square foot. It's a great comparison. There are lots of metrics and lots of ways for you to identify if there's opportunities for you to save. But don't stop there. Take a look at cost. Take a look at use. Take a look at demand that's happening in your buildings. Take a look at your electrical demand and see if those numbers make any sense. Compare your buildings of different sizes and shapes. Let's assume that you have a campus of buildings and some of them are similar the way they operate. Maybe they're not 24/7 buildings. Maybe they operate more on business hours. They're 9 to 5 types of buildings. Benchmark those against one another to see how they compare, to see if one or maybe more of them are just using way more energy than another. And that in and of itself doesn't mean that it necessarily is using more than it should, but you should look at it close enough to understand if something's driving that change. Maybe there's some medical equipment on site that it's a high energy user and it's explainable, it's understandable as to why that building might be using more. But it doesn't happen unless you get the data in one spot and you take a look at it and you compare. But find those energy hogs, find those buildings that seem to be using abnormally large amounts of energy and begin to dig into those. By doing this, it helps you to target where you might upgrade your facilities, look at the efficiency improvements or mechanical changes. I've mentioned a couple of times in the webinar today how many of our buildings are needing to run 24/7. And if they're going to be running 24/7, we should make sure that they are running as efficiently as possible in order to offset some of the burdens and the costs that are associated with running things 24/7. And finally, on this slide, mentioned in the tool, Energy to Care. Energy to Care allows you to take your data and share with Energy Star. So you might already have data that's part of the Energy Star portfolio manager. That data can be pulled back into Energy to Care, or if you want to put the data in Energy to Care and push it out to Energy Star portfolio manager, you can. But the Energy Star program allows you to score your buildings and see how your buildings are doing relative to their peers. So it's great information. And don't disregard the CPEX data. Again, data that's out there that can help you to see how you're doing compared to the median buildings around the country. Another area of improvement or something that you might consider as you're on this journey to improve is you have to take a look at your billing process. Does your organization struggle with getting the data into the system? If you're using spreadsheets or you're using some other type of system, or do you need help there? Maybe you need a partner, somebody that can help you get that data to where it needs to be. And maybe you also need help paying your bills. So there are different services that can be provided to help you get your data and pay your data. So make sure you're looking for partners that can help you to get that done. Because if all of that is costing you time or it's costing you money, now might be the time to address that with these higher utility rates coming down the pipe. So speaking specifically of our product Energy Cap, what I've taken you through so far in today's webinar is the first couple stages about getting your utility data and trying to automate the data or begin to monitor the usage and look at benchmarking. But you can see here in step 4 and step 5, you can take it further. And many of you are under requirements or expectations at a minimum of reporting on your data. You need to do GHG reporting. You need to report on your greenhouse gases and emissions. So you might be looking for a tool or strategies to do that. It starts with having the data in one spot. And my favorite stage of this whole process is stage number 5. It's about taking action, about getting out in the facilities, learning what you have, identifying opportunities, and the data empowers you to do that. And you can see by this chart here, if you go down this process, usually you can see very significant savings over the course of time. Now, I want to back up a little bit and talk about some of the tools that ASHE provides on their website and through their through the links that they have on their website. I found this information. I just think it's perfect. It really coincides and syncs up with my experience that I've had in the field for 20 years. And so this list, again, I want to give credit to ASHE and their Energy to Care toolkit, but they're key steps. So number 1 on this here, you have to understand how efficient your building currently is. So the first thing is to get all this consumption, as we keep saying, get your data, get it in one spot, and understand how your building is doing relative to its peers. Step number 2, you have to establish someone who is in a position to lead the charge. An organization needs an energy manager or a sustainability champion because we're all busy in each of our responsibilities. And if somebody doesn't have this as their number 1 responsibility, an organization quite simply is not going to reach its highest level of success. So somebody has to do this. And I would recommend, if organizations are considering whether they should hire or not hire somebody, or Another possibility is to add this responsibility to someone's list of responsibilities. I would say you need somebody who's dedicated to commit the time and energy to do this to the best of their ability. The third point here is we need to engage an executive sponsor. A really critical piece of what I've seen in working with organizations of all types, somebody who has an executive title has to get involved in this process because of the credibility that they bring to the process. So engaging an executive sponsor, and ideally multiple executive sponsors, in order to drive the forward program, set an expectation for the organization for improvement, and make sure that it's reasonable, jumping down a couple here, establishing clear goals, set that expectation, but make sure the goals are clear. And if those are coming from that executive sponsor, it usually works best with the organization. Another bullet here is establishing a team huddle. This, again, so important. This process of improvement cannot be done by one person by themselves. This needs to involve a lot of people from many different facets of the organization, and it has to happen regularly. If you're bringing your team together once a quarter or once a year, I mean, some minimal amount, it is very difficult to build momentum and solve problems. If energy conservation and improving the overall operational efficiency of your organization is important, people need to invest some time and effort into doing that and meet regularly. And by doing so, it begins this series of positive events that move you in that direction. Developing action plans and tracking your results, again, overall, very important to the process. Additional things. Don't start with tracking your greenhouse gases, is what I would say, the second bullet here. I would say you want to do that eventually, but don't get stuck on that. Let's start to get things happening in the facilities where you're making changes and you're reducing energy load, and then catch up on that part later. So if you're under pressure to report on that, you got to do that if that's what's being expected. But I wouldn't suggest people start there. I would say people should use that as a way to celebrate their success as they're making progress. I think it's important for organizations to have something around the organization that people see that that organization is committed to doing better. And what I mean by that is maybe it's posters, it's energy posters, or it's little placards that are in our buildings, or maybe it's emails that go out, some type of media, some type of dashboard that goes out to the organization with regularity that sets an expectation, encourages, promotes, celebrates what the organization is trying to do. Overall, it's an important part of the process. If that gets ignored, usually you just don't build the momentum that you need to in order to get to where you want to go. One last thing to highlight on this slide is this idea of create a training plan. A common theme that I learned in working with different groups of people is most people tend to do the best they can at their job. And if they're not doing it the way it benefits the organization the most, and in this case, energy conservation or managing their facilities, it's because they don't know how to do it better. Don't disregard the importance of training, encouraging, developing, providing resources for people to do what they need. Because I really believe people do things to the best of their ability. So let's just make sure that we empower them by getting the training that they need in order to do that. I want to switch gears on you now. Want to get into this idea of what I'm calling your building biofeedback therapy. So in the medical industry, we all get connected to things and get our heart rate tested and so on and so forth. There's just many ways that technology is used for us to measure what's happening in our bodies. Well, same thing is true with your buildings. And if you're not familiar with this idea of real-time data, this is data that flows into our buildings. And your electric company might have this data, or you might have this data happening right now and you're just not seeing this data. But real-time data is pulse data that typically is collected in 15-minute intervals. And with this first graph, let me slow down a little bit and explain to you what's here. This graph is a 24-hour period, and it's measuring electrical consumption. So that's what's on the axis over here. So this green line, or this green wave going across here, represents what is typical for this particular meter. This black line is plotted out based on the pulses that are coming in every 15 minutes to find out how the building is actually performing. So this is measuring our usage in 15-minute intervals. So when the black line is within the green region, it means it's normal. It's just functioning as you'd expect it would. When it deviates, and in this case here, where it gets outside of the green band, this is suggesting that the building is using more energy or an event happened that probably requires some attention. This blue vertical bar represents a period in your billing cycle or in your day when you might have to pay more for electricity. And so having this real-time data is a way for you to diagnose how you doing relative to normal. And if you're getting outside of normal, how is it affecting you? And so this would suggest, because this blip in the data happened during the worst time of the day, you're going to suffer a financial consequence as a result of that happening. So the main message here, and I have a few more of these that I want to share with you, is look at this data. If this isn't part of your process in order to use this data, most of the organizations I work with have this data at some level. It might only be for a few meters, or it might be for hundreds of meters, but this real-time data is the best tool that you can use to analyze the performance of your buildings. Here's another example. In this situation, similar to the previous, the green wave going across the region represents what's normal, and the black once again represents the usage that's occurring in real time. This is a period of 7 days going across here. And if you notice, what's happened here is the black bar gets outside of the green, but it's intentional. What this is telling us is that a building is actually setting back, that it was being turned on during a period, being turned on again, but at some point, it was able to be turned off. And I share this because one of the recommendations that I think you need to consider is with buildings on your campuses that can be set back, they should be set back with regularity, whether it's weekends or longer periods of times, or let's suppose buildings are closed over a holiday period of time between Christmas and New Year's, as a for instance, where the occupants are just not in the building. This data tells that story and allows you to measure that performance and verify it. And then you can quantify the benefits that occur from it. Another example here, similar to the last, different graph and a little bit of a different story, but this time here, it's a bar chart, and each one of these bars represents usage again. And you got your 3 humps here showing the 3 days of the week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You've got nothing here on a Saturday and a Sunday, and 2 other humps on a Monday and a Tuesday. So it's looking at the performance of a building over the course of a 7-day week, and you can very quickly see that a building is going occupied and then going unoccupied. But what I wanted to flag about the data in this case and what's available with this software is you can take a look at how much energy is being used when you're running on schedule. If you notice my cursor down here to the right, or when the building is running off schedule. So as a for instance, this number here, this off schedule, this roughly 11,000 number, this is what would be spread out over the course of the 7 days of the week. So if you were to divide that number by 7, that right there is telling you how much energy is being used in your building after hours. And you could also turn that into a number, a cost. What's the cost to operate? And this number here is represented by the humps that are in the data. And since there are 5 humps, if you were to take this number and divide it by 5, that's telling you what the cost is in order to turn this on. Now, why I think that's important is as we try to execute projects around our buildings, we struggle to calculate ROI post-project. We do sophisticated calculations before projects are executed, and we attempt to suggest how much they're going to benefit the organization. I would argue that one of the things that we got to begin to do is we've got to take a look at ROI after a project and measure it, because so many things change. It will, by measuring things and confirming that we're getting good things happening in our buildings, I think it promotes, or it gives us the permission to do the next project, and we don't get scared away from it because we can see through data like this that good things are happening in our buildings. Another example, this one here is just using this real-time data to identify a leak. So here the green bar going across is just showing no usage. Maybe that meter was used, turned off. Uh-oh, now it looks like this meter is never returning back to the x-axis, so it's never returning to 0. This data could identify a leak in real time. And also, if this leak isn't caught, it would allow you to measure the waste here. And one of the things that I've had great success with through the years is working with utility companies and recovering when there are water leaks. Usually they will forgive water leaks if you can show when it happened and how it happened. And this data gives you the power to do that, empowers you to make that happen. A few other graphs and just picking up the speed a little bit here. Here you can compare two different periods of time. So here I've labeled this as a preceding period. So maybe you're looking at February and looking at the month of January, and you just simply want to see how things compare, and it rolls up totals here. So you can see how one period would compare with the previous period. Or if you have a situation where you have multiple submeters, you have a lot of data coming in. My example here is looking at an apartment building where you might have many apartments that feed into the overall use of the entire building. This allows you to see how one apartment or one space would compare with another. And the terminology we use is the children. You're looking at the children of the total. And it's, again, rolls up values here so you can see how performance from one to another is happening. Last couple ones here is overlays. So with this data, many times it's helpful to look at use intensity or temperature. And I've shown that here on this slide with the black line going across, showing the temperature and how it may affect the usage. Pardon me. Sorry about that. All right, so summarizing this real-time data for these last slides, I think there are many benefits. It helps you identify your high base loads, your areas of high load factor or power factor. It allows you to remotely monitor your spaces, and that's a huge benefit when you can make a change in your facilities and then not have to go there and remotely see this data and draw conclusions from this data. As I mentioned, you can identify leaks and opportunities, and it provides you great data for a more detailed return on investment analysis. So, taking action. I had mentioned at a slide earlier in the presentation today about how this is my favorite part. This is the part where the actual rubber meets the road, where you can save energy and save money. So in taking action, you have to make sure you're benchmarking your facilities, both inpatient and outpatient. You need to take a look at daily reports of your building automation system. One of the things that I've observed as the biggest savings opportunity is the building automation system not functioning as intended. And so I would recommend, if this is not part of your process, you look at your building automation reports with regularity, or you have a staff member print these things, review them periodically. But this is where there is great opportunity. I want to tell you a little bit about a university out there right now that's done this, and they're having great success running these reports and capturing savings. But evaluate your lighting systems, your HVAC systems. Think about how you're allocating your capital dollars for your improvements. And another important bullet here is make sure you partner up with service providers that really understand what you're trying to achieve and can be good partners with you over the course of time to help you keep your buildings working as well as they can. So other areas or common areas of energy waste is HVAC overventilation. Most of our facilities have the ability to heat and cool, and the challenge is if they're doing it simultaneously. And so once again, it gets back to these reports, these building automation system reports, to identify if your spaces are heating and cooling simultaneously, but a big opportunity for most organizations. So keep your eye on that one. Again, lighting in unoccupied spaces. Maybe this is a personnel thing. Maybe we want to encourage people when they leave rooms, if it makes sense, to actually flip a switch if there aren't motion sensors. But lighting is a big deal in an organization, particularly when some or many people go home. We need to get the lights turned off in order to make sure that we're keeping our load lower. Look at plug load. The things that are that maybe are always on. Can some of those things be unplugged? And then also I give an example of old chillers or old boilers here. If you have equipment that is aging, it's probably time to take a look at that and begin to plan for replacement. I want to give credit back to ASHI too for this list. This list is again part of some of the documentation they have on their website, and I just think it's phenomenal. It's just a great detailed list of what I think are the biggest savings opportunities that organizations have. And just highlighting a couple of these, it's looking at number 3, operating room unoccupied setbacks. We recognize this is a challenging space to seek energy savings in, but for most organizations, their operating rooms are not being used 24/7, and there's a chance to set them back and reduce airflows. It's a great opportunity for savings. Jumping down to number 7, thermostat temperature set point standards. You need to, within your organization, have some standards for heating and cooling that are, for the most part, universally used throughout the organization. It's not efficient if some areas within your facilities are cooling, say, to 68 and other ones are cooling to 76 because of personal preference. We need to standardize those set points to make sure that the facilities are more consistent, and it's just easier for the facilities team to manage these. But this list, most importantly, is a list of technical things that require a lot of attention and a commitment. That's the main takeaway from this list. So without speaking specifically to every item on this list, the main thing I want you to see here is these things require a commitment from the organization and a lot of technical know-how in order to execute these things. And so the main thing that I want to use that list for is to encourage this idea of developing an operations plan for doing retro commissioning. Testing these sophisticated systems, monitoring them and making sure they're performing the way they're supposed to is critical to the overall savings for a healthcare organization. Most healthcare organizations have these sophisticated systems. They have plants, they have energy distribution, and just due to the nature of how they operate, it makes things very complicated. And as a result, retro-commissioning these systems just is an absolute critical piece to keeping your energy costs low. I want to highlight somebody that I actually ran into this week, and that's the University of Illinois. And I recognize the University of Illinois is not a healthcare institution, but this chart here, or this graph, shows the complexity of what they're dealing with at the University of Illinois on their campus, where they have solar installations and wind power, and they're an energy market participant. So they're taking a look at their utilities. There's campus chilled water that's being distributed around the entire campus. I put this here because I want you to see that just because they're not a healthcare institution, they're a very complex organization with research and all sorts of different things happening on their campus, like most healthcare organizations have as well. And what they did, and the thing that I want to offer to you, is they were very proactive in their recommissioning effort. So back in 2007, they said, you know what, we can do better. We know we've got a lot of energy waste in our buildings, and we need to create a program in order to capture energy waste. So their recommissioning teams have gone through 90 of their buildings over the last 15 plus years and reduced their energy consumption by 27%. They've reduced their costs or saved $120 million over 12 million square feet of facilities. And I found this example in talking with the team from the University of Illinois to be very powerful, because I know this is the #1 challenge most organizations face as they try to reduce their energy costs. Retro commissioning is the answer. It's convincing people that we have to commit the resources to doing the retro commissioning. Now, at the University of Illinois, their return on investment was less than 3 years. That's what they've measured. And what I want to talk about is a way to measure return on investment, a tool called cost avoidance. Cost avoidance is this idea that you have to compare a baseline period to a post-baseline period and measure apples to apples how you're doing. Why I think this is important is many projects, as they're planned and executed, have high expectations of performance, and sometimes that performance gets lost in the shuffle, where people don't understand the complexity of everything that's happening. Measuring cost avoidance and taking a look at all the things that could affect the performance, such as weather, change in square footage, change in mechanical systems, change in occupancy, and a whole list of other things. If you disregard those variables, it doesn't give you a fair measure of performance. So I think it's very important that as you do projects or you commit effort and energy into doing different things, you got to measure it. And cost avoidance is the tool to do that. This chart here is a quick representation. where the blue line going across the picture represents your energy usage in a baseline period. You've committed to doing something, you've installed something, or you're changing behaviors. That blue line continues as the energy that's being measured, but you have to create an adjusted baseline. You have to create a fair comparison, this idea of apples to apples comparison, because the region in here, the green shaded region, really represents the savings. And to accentuate my point, this is the part that I think most organizations don't do. They don't take the time to measure that, because if you think you are doing a project and it was going to see a certain level of savings and that savings doesn't show up, some of that savings might be lost due to the weather, or it might be lost due to changes in square footage or other variables that have been unaccounted for. And so the organization is less likely to do the next project. So I think measuring this is critical to improving and making smarter decisions in the future. I want to round out today's webinar by just highlighting a couple facilities or a couple organizations that are using Energy Cap. So the University of Texas Medical Branch, they brought together a bunch of meters and a bunch of sub-meters. They reduced their load significantly, saw significant savings. And so they rode the ride that I have been preaching over the course of this webinar, is you got to get your data in one spot, you got to get it organized, you got to look for those savings opportunities and drive down costs. Another example is Baptist Health South Florida. Here, if you notice, they are managing over 700 utility accounts and 900 meters, and their process internally was very fragmented. They didn't have a team of people who are working in coordination in order to get the work done. So they've reduced the reporting time by 50%. They've centralized their system. They even found a huge billing mistake or a series of tax mistakes in their bill where they were refunded more than $1.3 million. So a huge, huge win for the organization as they got their data in one spot. And the last example is MD Anderson Cancer Center. You can see here they've got a utility budget of more than $50 million. So just a huge, huge utility budget. They manage 16.5 million square feet. And one of the things that they really want to do that has been a big help for them is now they have a much better budgeting process because of the huge costs around their campus. So by bringing all of their data into one spot and organizing it, they can better plan. And as they're doing projects around campus, it allows them to better budget for their facilities. So to summarize, Energy Cap, some of the best features is reporting features, creating reports and dashboards, this cost avoidance again, which I think is just so important for helping organizations measure change. Got to be checking your bills, got to do those bill flags. Make sure you can, working with tools that can pull data out where you can get the data to do analysis for different projects and benchmarking. And at the end of the day, it's about bringing all the data together to save costs and time and reduce your usage. So with that, we're going to move towards the question and answer part of today's webinar. So if you would like to learn more about Energy Cap, please offer us some feedback here so that we can respond and reach out to you and help you. But I also want to make sure that carved out 10 minutes here to answer any questions that you might have.
Yeah, awesome. And while you guys are taking the time to answer, the ghost voice behind the scenes, Daniela, is going to bring up some questions. Tom, as always, thank you so much. We've gotten some requests for the slides and comments about how helpful the information has been. So I know several of you have already been responded to, but wanted to let y'all know that the slide deck will be available afterwards, as well as the recording. You'll receive it both via email, and you can always find it on our website. But we did have a few questions come in. One of the things, there are a few that are already complete, but I did just want to give, let me see who it was. Oh, Thomas Lazaro, you had asked a question, but if you don't mind just sending something over that's a little bit more with context, I can position that question a little bit better with the group. But in the meantime, I think if we can take the poll down, that would be lovely. Thank you for having that up. Awesome. So Tom, some questions for you.
Great.
All right. So somebody said, I'm intrigued with the idea of having a retro commissioning team. How would you build that team?
Yeah, great question. Well, in talking with the team at the University of Illinois, what they did is they wanted to bring together people that had experience in the field. So they wanted to get a couple people that were actually controls people that had worked for their different vendors. They wanted to get engineers together, people that maybe had a better idea of the design of the systems, and they just wanted to include the overall HVAC team at the university. But if I were to give a recommendation for someone motivated to build a team, I think first of all, I have to look at your systems internally. So if you're managing, let's just suppose 10 million square feet of space, you may have multiple controls vendors that you're partnered with. And I'll just throw out a couple as examples, like Siemens or Johnson's Control or Schneider Electric. What I would do is I'd make sure that I was trying to find some people that had experience in those different systems. So let's suppose you're building a team of 3 people, try to find somebody from each of those different systems and make sure they have experience. And another key part of this is it's the personality type. You want to find people that are really highly motivated to solve these types of problems and are inquisitive, because many times in getting to the bottom of how some of the buildings are not running correctly is a challenge. Because organizations, and something I maybe should have said during my explanation earlier, is this is the number one opportunity to save, because what drives this opportunity is the fact that many organizations, as they conduct building improvement projects, they delete out or they minimize the commissioning component at the end because of tight budgets. So if you can imagine, you're spending $10 million in a project, you've begun to run out of money, you've minimized the commissioning. And so now this retro commissioning or recommissioning or really doing the commissioning for the first time just becomes vitally important. So it's, again, kind of getting back to the question. It's finding that core group of people that are inquisitive, that have the experience in the industry. And it's also very helpful if they're really good communicators, because it's necessary as these folks move around the buildings. They're going to need to talk to the occupants of the building and find out areas that might be heating or cooling well or poorly. And so those are a few attributes, but that's where I'd start. I'd look maybe at local vendors and try to find those people.
Great, thank you. Let's see. We've got. I think this one might be a question for the back end. Jesse, will follow up with you. Are you able to provide AIA CEU credits? That's not something that we can answer, so we'll let Ashi chime in with that after the fact. But one of the other questions that we did have come in was, our campus doesn't have much submetering to tell us where the energy is being used. How important is it to have this information?
Yeah, great question. It is critically important. If you really want to ramp up your efficiency, you need to know where the energy is going. And some organizations choose not to invest in submeters because they think there's no payback in making that commitment, that financial investment. And I would argue the opposite. If you really want to manage things differently and more aggressively, you need to know where the energy is going. So getting those meters installed, very, very important. And what I would also urge people to do is to do a pilot. I would not suggest, if you have facilities that have a plant or some district energy that's being pushed around your campus, I wouldn't suggest you go out and make an investment in hundreds and hundreds of meters. What I would suggest is take a look at your facilities, find those that are you can anticipate with the greatest energy use, and put meters in those critical areas. Start to diagnose where the problems are by strategically placing those meters so that you can begin to learn. And then over time, as your opportunities grow or as your need for knowledge grows, then you can add more meters over time in order to do a better analysis.
Awesome. Thank you. Then we had one more come in, I think we have time for, is how do you suggest trying to save energy in the most critical areas like operating rooms? And I'm sure you'll mention it, Tom, at the end as well, but we did pull some content from Ashi's energy resources and created a 12 ways to save guide that we can also include in the follow-up. So I'll hand over the answer time to you, Tom, but wanted to throw in that little plug there.
Yeah. The critical thing is, we're talking about operating rooms. It's this idea of something I've measured before. It's doing a pilot. Let's suppose you have an organization that's got 10 operating rooms, as a for instance. I would not suggest doing something with changing airflow or air exchanges per hour with all 10 of those rooms the same day or the same time. I would look for windows of time when there might be less occupants in the operating room. And what I mean by that is maybe there's times of the year where there's just less happening. Do you mean look at schedules? Just kind of try to minimize the risk to the occupants to your operations. And then I would conduct a pilot. So take a look and maybe you can isolate a room or two rooms and try it. Try it at a time, maybe when there's not active surgeries going on, something like that. And do it, take off small little bites, prove the concept that it can happen, and then you can do the next one and the next one. And that whole approach is one that I would suggest for many different things in these facilities. Is I would never suggest charging in and doing things randomly or very quickly and aggressively right off the bat. The process of energy management is one that's usually slow and very methodical, and it's never stopping and always looking for opportunities. If you commit to that over the course of time, over years of time, you'll drive your energy use intensity down. And so do those pilots, take those little nibbles, and then when you can take a nice bite and reduce energy, do that. But take it one bite at a time.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I don't see any additional questions that have come in. Tom, if you want to maybe just toggle back over to the slide that has your contact information. Tom is a great person to follow on LinkedIn. Obviously a little plug for Energy Cap. We post some pretty great stuff too that Tom helps curate. So feel free to follow along on social if you are on there. And Tom, unless you have any last words, we can wrap up.
No, I think I'm good. Please, again, if you have questions or I can help in any way, that's what I enjoy very much is getting into people's worlds and trying to offer some insight just because of my experience. So thanks for joining today. It's been great having you join the webinar, and I appreciate your time. So thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.